Okay, now when it comes to a proposal, basically what this comprises of is that we shall be talking of what we call a title page, an introduction, problem statement, objectives, research questions or hypothesis, scope of the research, justification, significance, materials and method, and then references. Basically, this is an outline of a proposal. These are the components that must be contained in your proposal. So make sure that you have most of these before you say that I have what a proposal. Now let's talk about what you call a title page. Basically here the standard that is used at Chambok University, here the standard requires you to have what we call a title page, which includes the title of the research, student's registration number, and of course the name, then the statement indicating that it's a research or project proposal, and then a proposed supervisor. Now, here the statement indicating that it's a research proposal can be something that sounds like a research proposal submitted to the Department of Chemistry. Now, many people confuse the department and the faculty. For undergraduates, most of their research is submitted to the department, not to the faculty. What's actually submitted to the faculty is more of graduate research. So students should not confuse that. So the statement can sound like research proposal submitted to the Department of Chemistry in a partial fulfillment of the requirements for award of a bachelor's degree in science, technology, chemistry, or a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering and process engineering, something like that. So then you propose a supervisor. Now, a title obviously should be of course, a good title should be very precise, focused, and descriptive. Here we are talking of one, we don't need something that is too wordy. In most cases, 20 words are enough. Out beyond that is more of a paragraph. So it should be concise, focused, and descriptive. Have something, it should be describing something someone should be able to understand it with ease. And then of course a lot of students fail to understand it. In most cases, what is required in research is your ability to communicate your idea to the people that possibly you are going to be reading. I keep on telling students that in most cases you do research that is very interesting and it calls for public concern. So in most cases, this research attracts attention. But how are you able to transform your information or to simplify your information for other people to be able to understand it? So something like that, you should make sure that you are able to you are as simple as possible for someone who actually is interested in your work but is not of your field, but the work is necessary. For example, an environment student can publish work which environment is of a public concern. So any person can be interested in such work. So you make sure that you are so simple in a way that every person is able to understand. And then of course for marking purposes, if your research report landed on someone who is not actually in the field that you are uh, you are, so it means that you should be able to make that person understand. Otherwise, obviously, you would get very limited marks, very small marks. So more often a title, not a topic, is stated in terms of functional relationship, clearly indicating the dependent and independent variables. Now here, when you look at the dependent variables, we look at things that actually depend on other things. For example, if you looked at temperature and temperature of temperature of water that is undergoing heating with time. So we look at, you realize that as time increases, the temperature does what? The temperature also increases, but there is no, but time does not depend on anything. It is temperature that is depending on time. So temperature is a dependent variable and time is independent. So also think of informative and catchy title with the doing word. You should do informative, should have some, the title should communicate something, and obviously it should be something that catches. You have seen publications, you have seen books where just the title, for example, I remember reading a book titled Missing Heaven by 1 inch. What a title. It makes you eager to know what it is inside there. That should be what we call a catchy title, something that grabs attention of the reader. The title should not also be biased, as if you already have the results, as if no. Then no full stop should be placed at the end of the title. In most cases, titles are written in capital letters. Why do you have to full stop it? A full stop applies to sentences, not headings nor titles. It should show that what is to be measured. Now, in case something like, for example, if we are talking of heavy metal analysis, you should mention what is to be measured. Are we together? Mention what should be measured. Okay, let's now look at the introduction. Now, introduction actually it is the building block of the top of the research. Without the introduction, then there is no clear information that can be used to basically describe your work. So introduction is as that important. So introduction obviously is the first chapter, and it is intended to provide the necessary background and the context of the research problem. As you realize, this is the point where the research problem is brought out. The introduction gives the first impression of the proposal write-up quality. This is very, very important. As I told you earlier, without the introduction, someone cannot have a clear path, a clear direction of your work. The introduction usually begins with a general statement of the problem area, followed by the focus on a specific research problem. Now, of course, when we say it usually begins with a general statement, now this statement is actually a building block of the problem. You are trying to give us the little of the background. For example, if it is you are trying to bring out the gap that is actually calling for this research. So next is the rationale or justification of the proposed study. Rationale or justification. You have to justify why is it necessary, why is your work, why is it necessary? Is it that without it there is something that might happen? So you need to bring out that. Then do not include lengthy background information. Of course, background information is the very first component of the introduction. Now, this background should at least be something less than a page. Probably a half a page works. Don't write something that is beyond that. Of course, the background we are trying to bring out to describe the problem, the source of the problem, not to just bring it out to show that gap. If it is a and of course in most cases you have to retrieve some information from the literature. So include a sentence title sentence which indicates the main thrust of the introduction. Of course, it can be the starting point or at the end of that background. It makes more sense. For example, if I use this statement to act as my the statement This proposal is concerned with determining the percentage purity of iron in rock samples from Katwe iron mine. You see, it 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 can be, it's a very a welcoming statement. Someone is, it's easily understandable, and you easily connect with other parts of of your your research, of your background, or your title. Example number 2 can be like, this proposal will examine the efficiency of a crystallizer at ABC Company Sugar Works. Of course, I couldn't mention, for purposes of, I couldn't mention a company in here, but it is very clear. The proposal will examine the efficiency of a crystallizer. Of course, you know, a crystallizer is one of the components of a sugar production process. So you're trying to link your information. So generally, a good introduction is about the right length, gives a title, relevant background and a context, and makes some initial references to the sources, and finally focuses precisely on the problem. Of course, the problem can be too, the information is too much to be retrieved, but you need the specific information that actually relates to the problem. You don't have to bring everything. That's why we are limiting, we are emphasizing that the statement should, that introduction should be within half a page. So you cannot retrieve everything. Now, I talked of the fact that in the introduction you have to retrieve some information from the literature. So you need to include it, to cite some information in there, because I can guarantee you that you are not the first person to produce this kind of work. So don't take it in a way that it makes you think, it makes someone believe that is original, it's something like happening for the first time. No, you need to see how other people have come about, have faced that problem, how they solved it. Okay, now a problem statement. Now this should be the gist, should bring out the gist of everything that you are proposing. The research problem should not be framed in a general context. Otherwise, the research question will appear trivial and uninteresting. This is so nice. You don't have to bring out the problem in a way that it is a general one. It should be specific to a given stuff. For example, you cannot say you are going to analyze heavy metals. You are going to analyze heavy metals in the country, sampling from all places in a country. You have to specify, bring out that specific point of interest. It should, however, be placed in a focus. Point number 2 is that it should, however, be placed in the focused context of the research idea, making significance to the evident. To be evident, there should be something that makes, actually, in your problem, you should be able to make it so clear and way forward, something that is very clear, and should, to make, like, once someone reads it, is able to actually come up with the significance of your work. But you describe it in a way that there is a necessity for your work to be done, for that work to be done. A problem well understood leads to a problem well framed. I liked this statement. I keep on reciting it. If you don't understand a problem, obviously you can't frame it well. So you need to have that personal relationship with the problem. Then you are able to state it or frame it in a correct way. Obviously, poorly understood problem can lead to a poorly constructed one. Therefore, the first effort of any researcher is to understand the problem before communicating it as a proposal in writing. very clear. You can't communicate what you have not understood. A problem statement should be short and precise, very clear. It should be very short and precise. In most cases, less than 200 words. Why do you have to write too much? Of course, you should bring out the gap, the missing knowledge, with the losing statement reflecting the aim of the research. No significance, no background, no references. Please, if you cite in your literature, then it is more of repeating what people have done. I don't know. It is really inappropriate for you to cite in this problem statement. Problem statement should be original. Even if you're benchmarking on someone, please try to make sure that it sounds original. It should be a statement and not numbered, not bulleted, not reproduced from the literature, mentioning what is on the ground and not really mentioning the gap. Please, here, already the gap has been mentioned in the introduction, in the background. You don't need to bring out the gap again. So here you have to state your own problem, and you don't have to reproduce the problem from the literature. Already the literature has been retrieved at what? At the level of the background. Now we go to the next aspect, which is aspect number 3, objectives. State the overall objective called the aim or general objective. Now, objectives of the research are always split into two categories. We have a general objective. I repeat, a general objective, it's always one. You can't have two general objectives. You will always have one general objective. It can also be called aim. Aim. Usually rephrased from the title, it's always a duplicate. You recite the title in an action manner. And then, of course, we can split the aim or the general objective into smaller objectives that we call specific objectives with action verbs. Action verbs, they make it something experiment. That's something that you must do. So specific objectives should help answer the general objective. Now, when we say specific objectives come from the general objective, here we mean that actually each specific objective that you do helps you to attain the general objective. For instance, the simplest that I keep on telling is, I keep on sharing that if I am going to if I'm moving from point A up to point D, and along that we have point C, we have points B and C to reach D. If my general objective is to move from point A up to point D, then my specific objective should be to move from point A up to point C or point B, then from point B up to point C, then to. So each step I make still helps me, actually contributes, adds a stone onto the general objective of moving from point A up to point D. Specific objectives are broken down of the general objectives, very clear. E.g., going for lunch is general. Eat matoke is specific, very right. No mention of the methodology. You don't have to mention it here. E.g., premiership, taking the cup is general. Win all, training, fire, etc. These are now specific objectives. Of course, yes, objectives should be smarter, not just smart. They should be smarter. And under smarter, we just look at it as being specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. Then you should be able to evaluate and re-evaluate. This should be at the mind of every researcher. minimum of 1 and a maximum of 3. This is for undergraduates. For graduate, I think I'll produce a specific one for you. I'll produce another video for you for the graduates. But for undergraduates, please, you can play around with 1 or a maximum of 3 specific objectives, because here we are looking at 1, the fact that you don't have enough time to do most of this research. You're given limited time, you cannot do too much, and in most cases some of these objectives are long-term objectives. You find an objective that it will take you actually 3 months to attain. So such kind of limitations actually guide us on the number of on the number of objectives that we should have. Of course, we should not have these specific objectives bulleted, but they should be numbered. They should be numbered. Each objective should have an experimental procedure. Actually, for me to take your objective as a specific objective to give you a mark for it, it should be able to be subjected to a given experimental procedure to attain results out of it. So things like comparing data is not an objective, but comes under discussion under that specific objective. Realize, for example, I cannot say comparing heavy metal levels of point A and point B. What actually is a specific what would be a specific objective in here is to determine heavy metal, select the given heavy metal at point A and then a same metal at point B. Then that comparison should take place in your discussion. So comparing the levels between the two places does not make it an objective, but it is because there is no exact experiment, a lab experimental procedure that you are going to subject, that you're going to do to attain that. General words like assess, evaluate should not be used in the specific objective. Very clear. Assess is a general word, so it deserves to be in a general objective in the title. Evaluate, it is in the title. But when it comes to the specific objectives, you don't have to use such. Use more specific words, more preferably verbs. Let's look at the other aspect called scope. Scope, it includes the content, parameter, scope, boundaries of what to be done. We can look at things like time, geographical scope. For example, you can tell us when you are planning to do this, when, where, how. All this is under scope. Things like geographical scope, where is the sampling, analysis, etc. Though this also appears in the materials and the methods, but in the introduction, because I told you from the start, introduction gives you a clear path of the research. The other aspect is justification. This usually focuses on the methods and the approach or apparatus. Why would you think the approach can be useful to fill the gap? Why do you qualify the research to solve the problem while still in the lab or during data correction period? Get it? So this should be brought out for you to be able to justify your work. You should bring out statements that are able to tell us that actually your approach is appropriate. And in most cases, most of the research topics, you realize we have a number of methods of analysis. Why would you select that specific one? In justification, it must be brought out. significance. The significance tends to be more social, community-oriented, long-term impact on the community after the research is completed. E.g., how to process snow in European countries may be more significant to the whites than to Africa. This is very true. Here, let's look at research like you intend to come up with a method of actually removing snow. For example, let's talk of basically using sodium chloride. Many people, you understand this when it comes to solutes. You put a solute, we call it melting point depression, something like that. Someone is able to convert snow into a liquid. Now, you will look at that. Now, because there is no snow in Africa, such research cannot be significant to us Africans, but it can be to the whites. So you try to relate to the outcomes, how useful are outcomes of your research. Basically, let's talk of pollution, which is actually it actually affects everyone, irrespective of the area of residence or whatever. Could be in a very expensive place, but still pollution from a lowland can still affect you. Now, pollution, which actually is a wild factor that everyone is interested in. Just taking an example of Uganda in here, when you do such an, for example, determining pollution levels, possibly water quality in regard to water quality, and your results, whatever you get out of that, can be possibly used by organizations like NEMA, which is actually a government body that is responsible for environmental protection. We can talk of EPA, environmental impact, environmental policy, environmental protection agency, something like that. So at the end of the day, the public benefits from your work. So this significance should be brought out. Now we look at chapter number 3. There is an aspect that has been skipped: literature. We look at material and methods. Now, as we said it earlier, that each objective should have a scientific method or procedure in future tense for proposal or past tense for the final report. Very clear. Now, because we already by the fact that each specific objective requires experimental procedure, at this point you have to bring out that procedure, what exactly it is. And that procedure should be narrative rather than listing of steps. It should follow standard or accepted method. I keep on telling most of the undergraduates that please cease from using personal procedures. Cease from using personal procedures, because your procedures have not been subjected into thorough analysis, especially in regard to safety, a very important aspect. So you have to benchmark or use or copy directly from standard methods. For example, from ISO, International Standards Organization. You can also copy from places like ASTM, American Standards, Standard Methods for Testing Materials, something like that. Quoting in the video method, you can quote them. Include measurements in your procedure, like 20 ml flask, 5 grams of the soil sample. Very important, and it is very, take note of how the 25 ml has been written. Very important, take note of it. Here 25 ml, there is space between 25, the figure, and the ml, same to 5. there is a difference. There is that space between 5 and a G. Mm. Then avoid personal pronouns as I, you. Mm. Things like I will, we shall. Avoid such. Then, of course, use correct SI unit. Very, very important. SI unit. SI units. You should be able to know how to write them well. Ratios and percentages important when it comes to concentrations. Tell us whether it is weight per weight, volume per volume, percent, something like that. Bring out the concentrations. Very, very important. Then also indicate the equipment modern manufacturer. Now, many of you many of you do things from unauthentic places. Someone goes to a secretariat to do research, collect data within that room, analyze within that room, report within that room. Now, this is the point where I'm able to understand whether you were whether you did that work or you didn't. Because if you are unable to quote the equipment model that you used, then you disown your work, including the manufacturer. Now, when you're writing a proposal, you need to go deeper. You need to go deeper and come to a point where at least you are able to run a given instrument before you actually intend to use it already. You need to have the knowledge of the instrument. If you're proposing to use AAS from University X, for example, let's say from Chambogo University, come to understand which AAS model is available, how is it run. Most of the things are available on YouTube. You are able to know how most of the things can be run, all the way from sample preparation for different samples. For example, if we talk of soil samples, when you talk of plant samples, when we talk of water samples, you are able to watch most of these videos and gain knowledge before you come to start using it. It is important for you to state the percentage purity of the of chemicals that you use. Desist from general purpose chemicals, especially when you are dealing with analytical work. General purpose be solvents, for example, solvents. When you talk of maybe hexane, don't use general purpose hexane for HPLC purposes. There you don't just produce poor quality work, but you also destroy the equipment, because most of these equipments have specific grades of materials that they use. Levels instead of concentrations. Where necessary, you need to use levels rather than concentrations. Now, there are researches where your work is not quantitative, but it's qualitative. So in most cases, you are not affected so much by the concentrations, because you are interested in knowing what is inside, not actually how much is inside. When we are talking of how much is inside, most of the things that you do must be quantitative. For example, if we say add 2 meals, it should be 2 meals. For where you just need to look at what is inside, you may not necessarily be limited to how much you use. Is that clear? Of course, you have to mention of the permissions to use some samples for ethical purposes. You will land into researches where, for instance, blood samples are among the specimens that you have to analyze. You look and you cannot just sample or take the samples from humans without their conscience. So in most cases, you will have to mention these permissions. For example, if you are picking patients from Lago, you're sampling patients from Lago in a cough ward, patients affected by cough, you have to inquire from the authorities. You should have signatories from the authorities allowing you to sample, and you should also sample from people who have accepted you to sample from them. The other thing I have to emphasize is this next bullet: avoid food security cases. Just before you even think of submitting a proposal, please desist from topics that actually affect food security. Here we are looking at topics like topics that intend to use a food product or a food material, a material taken as human food for purposes of for other purposes that actually would result into starvation of people. For example, someone says, I'm going to use cassava for making alcohol. It's a brilliant idea, but if the consumption, actually you are increasing the consumption of cassava, and if the brewing industry pays more money to the farmer to produce cassava than for purposes of food, then it means that the farmer is going to produce more cassava to the company than giving it to selling it to other people for food. And because people may not be able to raise money the that the company raises to this farmer, it means that the people are going to starve to death. Yet the company making alcohol is actually making money. I think this point is clear. So avoid topics that intend to use food materials for other purposes. However, there is more information that we can do when it comes to diversification. You diversify, for example, wastes. We need to come to a level of what we call zero waste. For whatever is called waste should be given a purpose, should gain purpose. So that's more selling. Human samples need clearance, very clear, as we say, mention of permission. And in permission still, we have to look at, for instance, if you are sampling effluent from Coca-Cola industry, from Coca-Cola, you have to be cleared to pick that sample. Generally, be careful about legal implication. As you realize, permission, human clearance for human samples, all these things, if you do them outside the law, without permission, without authority to do so, obviously you have to stand, you will be subjected to you will be sued in court. So you have to be careful about the legal implications of what you do, what you publish. You pick a sample from somewhere and you analyze and you report very bad values, very bad results. And yet the same is analyzed, the same samples are analyzed within that facility, and whatever they get is correct. So they can sue you for misrepresenting the place. Now, we are talking of the references now, which is actually among the last things in the proposal. For KIU, for Chambok University, basically we use APA author and the date. Here, the citation should have the author and the date, for in most cases the year. And then of course, use of Mendeley reference management software, open source, is encouraged. You don't have to just type most of these things. You have to create that list of list of references and then keep obtaining your work from there. And most of this is now easy, especially with word 2:8, 2:10, and 2:16, even 2:13, very very well. And of course, in particular, we use epiethics sedition. For example, it will epiethics edition actually has the author, the year of publication, of which the authors, you list all the names of the authors, the year of publication, the title of that publication, and then the journal or the source, the publishing body, like that, then the volume number, then page number. So it can go deeper up to even a city of publication. You can put enough number of information that really actually justifies that this work is authentic. So this is one of the examples, Kirirajan R. So there is a list of authors. There is a year of publication. Then this is the title. This is the title. This one is the title. Then this is the publishing body. This is the volume. Then we have the pages containing the content. If you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments there. You can leave them in the comments, and it will be a good one. I will be able to respond to many of them, and yes, so you can have just a review of whatever we have been. You can play and pause and plan, pause, and then you can have a personal interaction with this. Very good. Okay.